Welcome back everyone! Today I will be making the first garment for my 1840s court gown, otherwise known as the Amalia type costume, the chemise. If you want to know more about the fascinating history of this dress and the project I'm making it for, I recommend you watch my previous video where I explain it all. To figure out the pattern for my main chemise, I looked at the accident garments. A great source for this was the website of the Lyceum of Greek Women, that has an archive of 4,100 pieces of garments, with multiple pictures and detailed descriptions. Looking at these examples, I saw that there were a couple of ways to go with the chemise. The main construction of it is very simple. Usually you have one length of cloth with a hole in the middle for the head, two rectangles for the sleeves, and sometimes added gores cut on the bias in the side seams for fullness. Where the chemises differ from each other is the way the neckline hole is cut. Some have a round hole for the head and a slit down in the front. Some are more v-necked, and there is this example that I like the most that looks like neither of the above mentioned constructions. So I have no basis on what I'm gonna say, but I think that the way this neckline is achieved is that you make the front panel with a slit and the back panel with a slight curve cut into it for the neck, and then you open the slit in the front panel and attach it to the back, matching the embroidery on them. The only issue is that this will create a shoulder seam that you otherwise wouldn't have. In my opinion, this is the only way to make the two front rows of embroidery as parallel to each other as they are in the pictures, without having that little color thingy as the others. I could be wrong, of course, but I still went with this method for a couple of other reasons too. Just to test my theory, I made a mock-up, and I really liked it. It worked just as I thought, so I went ahead and started working on the embroidery designs. I used this example from my book as an inspiration and first made 2 rows of embroidery that will decorate the front of the chemise. I did most of my design work in Illustrator because I know that program better and I can work in it quicker than the embroidery software. But once I'm ready with my design, I import it into PE and fix the stitch types and colors and whatever in there. I got this stripy semi-opaque beautiful linen silk blend for the chemise, inspired by the stripy accident garments I saw online. And I was a bit worried of ruining it, so I did a little test on another fabric to see how the colors work out and if I'll be able to open the V up as I'm planning to. The test went well, but the width of the decoration was a bit underwhelming. So I made the flowers bigger and added a second row of a little vine motif for more interest. I also decided that I want the bottom of the embroidery to end nicer than the original little lazy triangle I did, so I sort of worked the 2 rows of flowers endwise to meet up in the middle. Now it was time to finally use my actual fabric, and I was very nervous, so I paid extra attention to hoop it right. So the middle of the fabric is in the middle of the hoop, and all the lines are running straight. It was about 2 hours of embroidering and an hour of the damn gold thread getting tangled and messing up, but at the end I think it was worth it. Next step was to embroider the end of the sleeves. The sleeves were 2 rectangles, 55 by 50 centimeters, and it's this 50 centimeter was the length that had to be embroidered. But there's a catch. The maximum size my machine can embroider is 20 by 28 centimeters. This meant that I had to embroider 25 centimeters at once and then carefully move it over and pray that I matched the lines good enough and embroider the rest of it. I mean, it sort of worked out at the end. One of them got a little crooked, but man, I was nervous. Now, the last piece to be embroidered was the back. Here I had to take my embroidery design from earlier and make a rounded version for the back of the neck curve. that the last piece was also embroidered, it was finally time to assemble the garment. First, I attached the front and the back panels together, carefully matching the embroidery on the neckline. I sewed them together wrong sides facing, then I flipped them out and clipping the seam allowance I sewed them together again to create a French seam. Then I quickly had to address the issue of the little seam allowance that was left in the V-neck opening. Originally, I planned to interface that part, but then I realized I didn't want to compromise the opacity of the garment with an additional layer of fabric, so instead I just rolled the seam back twice and sewed it to the back of the metallic embroidery, essentially creating a teeny tiny rolled hem. For a moment I was thinking if I should add lace to the neckline, but it seemed a little too busy, so at the end I only added it to the sleeves, as I was originally intending to. Then hit the raw edges of the sleeve by folding it back twice and stitching it to the back of the embroidery. That hid the stitches quite well. To attach the sleeves, first I had to cut off the excess created by the construction method from the front panel. Then, matching the middle of the sleeve with the shoulder seam, I pinned them on. I also intended to sew the sleeves on with French seams, so once I sewed them on the wrong sides facing the wrong sides, I also closed the inner seam of the sleeve and the side seam, up to a point, the same way. Then I flipped the garment inside out and sewed all the seams over again. Lastly, I had to attach the side gores with French seams too, and hem the garment. I have to admit, hemming this thing was a lot trickier than I thought, and the hem turned out quite wonky. So I will definitely have to redo it at some point. My only luck is that no one will ever see it in the final outfit. Because the fabric is quite translucent, I wore this 1840 chemise under it, as it seemed the most appropriate thing to wear. If you're interested, I'll show you how I made this chemise in next week's video. final thoughts. I'm very pleased with the outcome of this project. This was the first time I ever made something of this scale with my new embroidery machine, so I was a little nervous, especially of the pattern matching, but at the end I think it turned out quite nice. My only regret is that I should have bought more of an ivory color thread as opposed to the one I used, which is a little too white. I might end up aging it a bit with something if I figure out how to do that without staining the fabric around. And of course, the hem is a disgrace, but I can still fix that later. Overall though, I think it was a great start to the project, and I'll see you next week when I'll be making the corset and the under chemise.